In the fast-paced world of business, finding a clear path to profitability can be a challenge. Welcome to 0 to 100 with your host, Jared Guy Randolph, seasoned business and finance expert. Tune in for actionable insights and strategies to accelerate your business success.
Hello, Accelerators. Today on 0 to 100, I am excited to introduce our guest, Eric Zager, who is the co-founder of Calculum. They are a supply chain finance expert. And let's just say he's worked for some big organizations such as the U.S. Army, as well as Marriott in procurement and logistics. You're going to learn a lot of very interesting things on how to save your business money, ways in which maybe you didn't know you could actually do, such as controlling your supply chain using AI to negotiate pricing and virtual card payments. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jared Guy Randolph. I am the founder of BoxFi. We are the nation's leading payment consultant, providing business growth solutions through payment processing. And I'm very excited to share the network that I have built over my 25-year entrepreneurial career to help you grow your business and become more profitable. Ladies and gentlemen, let's accelerate together. Eric, thank you for joining us on 0 to 100.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to have a very interesting conversation today. And what we typically talk about with financial management, etc., we're thinking a little outside the box and we're ratcheting up, going to the next level. And I would love for you to walk the audience through what Calculum does and how it supports the growth of their business.
Yes. So every company across the world, no matter what their size is, what their industry is, what their geography is all focusing on working capital. What that means is the cash flow and the trade-off between payables, receivables, and inventory. And it's a common goal that companies have, which is optimizing this working capital. And that is something that we focus on here at Calculum. We mainly focus on payables and receivables, not so much the inventory side, but how corporates can optimize this and make sure that they're paying on the right payment terms to their suppliers and receiving the correct payment terms from their customers.
So talk to me about what right payment terms actually.
So today, even the largest companies in the world, they're determining what the payment terms should be with their suppliers on an arbitrary basis, most likely, usually in Excel without a database. Now, for the very wealthy Fortune 500 companies, they're hiring consultants like McKinsey to come in and analyze the top 200. And after a few months and $500,000, they are presented with a PowerPoint on what those payment terms should be for strategic suppliers. But for the majority and bulk of their suppliers and for companies across the board, minus those Fortune 500s, they have an arbitrary term. Let's say it's net 30, net 60, net 90. And there's not really any science or analytics behind that term, what that payment term should be. And that's what we've developed the Calculum, is changing the way that these terms are determined, where we have a database that has over 3 million suppliers, where we look at instances of this supplier accepting payment terms or similar suppliers with similar attributes, meaning the region, the industry, the company size, and what they're accepting from other customers, and helping to even the playing field amongst buyers, so no buyers are indirectly financing their competition.
So, it's interesting because I've heard people talk in finance before, in lending before, about floating money. So you wait longer to pay someone, and this is with a lot of the larger companies, because you make some interest on the money. And I don't think that's what's going on here, but I'd love for you to take a deep dive on how controlling when you're making the payment actually impacts your capital as a company. So how it impacts your bottom line and your cash flow, because that's really what we're talking about here. And I'd love for the audience to have a deeper understanding of how that works.
So when we're talking about working capital, we're mainly focusing on the balance sheet rather than the income statement. So looking at those accounts payables and accounts receivables, as well as inventory. But for this case, we could focus on payables and receivables. And when you optimize that, as you said, paying your suppliers when they should be paid and paying your receiving money when you should, when from your customers, it makes for a case where you're financially healthy as the company goes. And especially with mid-market and smaller companies, the number one reason these companies go under is because of cash flow issues. And that's why it's so important to make sure that your cash flow is optimized. Now, When it comes to the cash conversion cycle, it really depends on the industry and the geography of the buying organization as to what that number should be. But the optimal would be a cash conversion cycle of 0, but that's not the case. It really depends on the industry. Some industries, their receivables are quite instantaneous, like in retail. Some industries like software, they don't have much inventory. So it really varies depending on the industry that they're operating in.
So how are you defining a supplier?
A supplier could be anything.
Is that service or just, is that, go ahead.
For us, a supplier is all business that you're doing with somebody providing something for the direct material of what you're producing or indirect. So everything from your telecom providers to utility bills to consultants. So the whole gambit.
So your supplier could not only be physical product at a restaurant or parts for a car dealership, but they could be your service providers that are working along with your business or your utilities, anything that helps you operate the business.
All 10.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about 30, 60, 90, which we're all familiar with as business owners. How does deciding when in that scale to pay impact the price that you're paid?
Yes, that's a trade-off. And there are really 2 levers that you can pull. And on our platform, what we provide, and a lot of the companies today, they have these calculations on Excel, and we're really trying to get companies out of Excel, where there's a trade-off between payment terms and price. And during COVID, what we were seeing is a lot more companies focused on better pricing rather than cash flow because money was cheap. Now, fast forward to 2024, we're at the interest rate environment we see across the globe. Companies are a lot more focused on working capital and extending terms, and in some cases, taking concessions with paying higher prices in exchange for longer terms. Now, again, it's up to the criteria of the corporate goals and the vision there. Are they more focused on cash flow or income? Where we come in to play is the intelligence. We can tell you what those payment terms are that the suppliers are accepting. And then let's say working capital and their cash flow is not a focus, but rather better pricing is. You can at least use the intelligence to be able to go to the supplier and say, hey, we know we're the nicer buyer. We know you're accepting terms at X level, and we are way below that tier. We would like to use this as leverage to get better pricing.
So give me a monetary example. And let's say you're a hotel and we're talking about bed linens and towels. How would you go in and help them assess what they're paying, when the right time is to pay, and what the term should actually be?
So it's a good example. I actually used to work for a smaller hotel company called Scholar Hotels. And they were competing with some of the larger players in town. And let's say we're analyzing this smaller hotel company, and they're buying towels and linens for all of their properties on day 30. And they're paying, let's say, $100,000 a month for these materials. Just a made up scenario. Our platform has the data from other ownership groups, larger franchise owners of these hotels that have much more properties or just better payment terms in general. And we see that they're getting the same treatment from that supplier, but they're paying on day 90. That smaller supplier is indirectly financing that competitor of theirs. Now, sometimes there's other factors here that we need to take into account. Like there might be some discounts that buyer is getting that the other one is not. But having the intelligence to see where you align with your peer group is something that is new to the field of working capital optimization and just how companies are now determining their payment terms.
So are you in that example saying that the smaller company, let's say they're paying on day 30, but the larger company is paying on day 90 and they're paying the same price, that the smaller company is subsidizing that?
Yeah, they're allowing that larger company to use that cash flow for those extra 60 days, if in this example, 30 versus 90, to do whatever they want with that cash.
Right.
And you can calculate their cost savings by looking at the buyer's weighted average cost of capital. And you can determine that as the cost savings in that sense.
So the big companies do this, and we're all aware that the big companies a lot of times have more preferential pricing They have a treasury department who is focused on looking at their P&L or their balance sheet on a daily basis. They're working through these terms directly with a lot of these suppliers. How does a service like Calculum help some of the smaller businesses, like the hotel we were giving the example of? How do you help them implement a service like this so it could help their restaurant or their car dealership?
So today, we actually work with mostly large Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, but we developed this platform and our vision is really to bring it to the mid-market and even smaller companies. And what we'd like to do is open up the database for these smaller companies where they can get it and know exactly what is being accepted on the market, because they're getting squeezed. I mean, we know this because we see it from the larger companies. Now, how it works for us, it's a similar process. There's not, something different where we would approach a smaller one versus a bigger one when it comes to the analysis process. But what is taken into account is the sustainability of supplier relationships and also the leverage that comes with each negotiation. So one added benefit of the platform that we've developed is telling you where your low-hanging fruits are and who to approach first. We don't want to push our clients towards conversations where there's likely not going to be much success. So that is why we develop models to estimate which ones would be more successful or not. And then also looking at the trade-off between payment methods as well. So not just looking at payment terms, and our goal isn't at the end of the day just extending payment terms. It's about finding the right payment term and aligning that with corporate goals. So along with just extending terms, looking at the vehicle of the payment. So are companies using dynamic discounting? Are they using a virtual card to pay that supplier? Are they participating in a supply chain finance program? And on the receivable side, are they participating in factoring, which is the opposite of supply chain finance?
So you talked about dynamic discounting. How does that?
So dynamic discounting is very simple to understand, and there's no limitations. Any buyer can use it. It's, as we said earlier, the trade-off between pricing concessions and the payment terms. So paying earlier in exchange for a discount. So let's say we're paying at net 60 days. We can go to the supplier and say, hey, we'll pay net 10 for a 1% discount or 2% discount.
Got you. And there's another way to play that. You could pay earlier for a discount, or you could pay later and you have that money to play with. If you had that additional money, or let's say, have you ever taken a merchant where they're paying on day 10 or day 30 and extended them out to day 90 so they can have more cash flow for a longer period of time?
We actually see that as the vast majority of cases. Dynamic discounting is getting less and less popular compared to payment term extension and or participating in supply chain finance programs or V-card acceptance, which has aspects of that as well. But especially with the interest rates, it's so becoming more popular to extend terms.
So how could a business owner, because our audience, they are business owners, they are merchants, they are entrepreneurs, and they're doing well in their business. They are working with many different suppliers of various types. How could they engage in something like supply chain financing programs to help them increase their profitability? What does that structure look like?
So with regards to supply chain finance, I mentioned before, dynamic discounting has no barriers to having that program set up. The opposite of that is supply chain finance, where there are a few barriers where it's pretty much geared towards investment grade buyers, whereas it's going to be more limiting for the smaller buyers in the market. Now, something that would be more attractive to some of the smaller buyers, maybe with a double B or lower credit rating, would be participating in a V-card program. And we partner with companies to be able to bring this to the market with intelligence and sharing with you which suppliers are already accepting virtual card as payment from other buyers.
What is virtual card payment?
So it's very similar to how we use credit cards at the store, where customers will pay a supplier and they'll typically get a rebate as well, 1%. And then with that, you have payment terms, like how we have it, we pay it at the end of the month. So on average, when you go to the grocery store and you're using a credit card, you're not paying for those groceries until day 40, day 45. So it works in a very similar way with virtual card. Now, they are more accepted here in the United States. We work a lot with European companies, and we see it's not as popular across the pond.
Mm. So, what would qualify you as a business owner for something like one of those virtual card programs? And I think it probably has a direct tie into what you said about businesses that are investment grade businesses versus those that are not. So, how does the grading system work to impact your ability to access that?
Yeah. So virtual card is typically, it's the criteria to get into it is not as strict as supply chain finance, but it's more geared towards the to know suppliers. And where Calculum comes in, we're strictly a data company. So we can simulate virtual card programs along with supply chain finance and dynamic discounting. But at the end of the day, we just have partners that fulfill that do the payment processing portion of that, because we don't have any limitation because we're a data company. So when it comes to currency, geography, industry, size of supplier, there's no limit. But we work with these other partners that fulfill on that virtual card supply chain finance.
That makes sense. I want to dive into something which you said in the beginning about reducing cost or extending payment terms. Let's talk about utilities in particular. What can you as a business owner do to reduce your expense for utilities through using a program?
So that's one of the few where it's very difficult to negotiate on. That along with insurance, because, utilities, they say, oh, you don't want to pay on this time, then we shut off your utilities. And it's usually a
Right.
monopoly in these towns. And it's very difficult along with insurance. If you don't pay your premium before the coverage period, they will just cut your insurance. You're not covered. So typically how we work with our clients is when we first onboard them and integrate their data to our platform, we exclude those utility payments, we exclude those insurance payments, as well as tax authorities. It's almost impossible across the world for your local and national tax authorities to be extended to the payment terms. They have a payment deadline.
Got you. So talk to me about your cash flow conversion cycle of zero. What does that mean to a business owner? And I think if I heard you correctly, said you can't really achieve it, but that's what you're working towards.
You can achieve it. It varies
Okay.
depending on, what it should be on your peer group. So really you should be comparing to peer group and not to a cash conversion cycle of zero. But in the ideal world, every company would have a cash conversion cycle of zero. Now, in reality, we'll probably never get there. And I can explain a little bit more about what that is. So companies are publicly traded. These financials are available. And Wall Street looks at these metrics to determine the financial health of companies. And it's a way for companies to get a higher stock price by optimizing this cycle. Now, there's really three components of the cash conversion cycle. It's looking at, on average, the payment terms you have with your suppliers, or DPO, days payable outstanding, the payment terms you're receiving from customers, or DSO, which stands for days sales outstanding, and on average, how long it takes you to move inventory off your shelves, which is DIO, or days inventory outstanding. Cash conversion cycle is the DSO, sales outstanding, plus the inventory minus the payables. So it's basically how long it takes you to go from cash to cash at the end of the day. And some companies do this very well. In the retail space, there's several that have negative cash conversion. I know Procter & Gamble is very sophisticated with this. You can look this up it's all public information, but they have cash conversion cycle in the negative 40s, I believe, because they are focused on this and they wanted to maximize the payment terms that they have with suppliers and reduce the receivables as well as inventory.
How do you get to a negative? Is that your receivables are just coming in earlier than you would typically
Yeah, we
have?
can take an example of a store. Let's say they pay all their suppliers on day 30. They get paid immediately day
Right.
zero. And on average, their inventory is on their shelves for 25 days. So that would be
Okay.
a conversion cycle of 25 days in inventory plus 0 days on receivables, and then minus 30 days paying those suppliers. So that's a cash conversion cycle of -5.
Oh, now talk to me about how, once you get to that zero or that into those negative terms, how that helps to improve your balance, not your balance sheet, your P&L, your income statement.
So, I mean, you're correct the first time when you say balance sheet, because these are looking at
Okay,
And the balance sheet
sheet.
is the accounts payable and accounts receivable. Now, if they were focused on this,
Okay.
they could say, hey, I mean, this is a theoretical, if they're in a negative cash conversion cycle and they are more focused on cost savings, reducing COGS, they can say, hey, we can afford to pay longer, maybe get into a slightly positive cash conversion cycle in exchange for discounts. And so it's really the trade-off there.
Got you. So let's take the information that you have, and we've kind of talked about it from a general standpoint. We've given some specific examples. I want to talk about the supply chain intelligence and how taking that supply chain intelligence can help you improve the bottom line, but also include aspects like ESG, DEI, et cetera.
Yes. And it's a focus now more than ever, especially since COVID, where there's all these supply chain disruptions. People want to know these companies want to know everything they can about their suppliers, risk analysis, knowing, what's going on in their supply chain. And we have some clients that are just interested in working with us because of the intelligence, where they are, they're happy with where their payment terms are, but they say, hey, we don't know everything we can about our suppliers, especially when it comes to financial risk analysis. So this is where we come in. So a lot of the intelligence points that we've seen are quite popular, even with the companies which are, the top of their field in payment terms, or data points like looking at the credit risk of a supplier, looking at how much it costs for them to borrow money, what the supplier's cost of debt is, along with their weighted average cost of capital, to see how, not just the financial health, but how likely they would be to participate in one of their supply chain finance programs. Because with that, it gives them a little leverage as well to be able to ask for certain things from the supplier if they participate on the supply chain finance program.
So when you're diving into that, you're actually getting a really intimate look into the health of that supplier's business and their need for capital. And you can use your knowledge of their need for capital to operate their business to negotiate better pricing on your business behalf.
Yeah, you can't tie the two together. I should clarify from my last statement. You can't tie the two together saying, hey, we're extending payment terms because we have a supply chain finance program, but it's a way for companies to be able to offer cheaper financing and support their suppliers as these SCF programs, because they assume the credit rating of the buyer, and along with that, their cost of debt. So a lot of times it's smaller suppliers with a higher cost of debt participating in these SCF programs to get cheaper debts and get their money much sooner than they otherwise would have from these buyers.
So it would actually be a restaurant group that's got 100 restaurants within their portfolio, and they're buying their fruit or the vegetables from a specific supplier. It's them providing the finance to the supplier.
So there's a third party there. There's a bank that's involved, or a supply chain finance platform like Orbian, where they work with them and offer the financing on the behalf of the buyer. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into that and setting them up and onboarding, but then it operates as a line of credit for the supplier to be able to use as they need.
That's really interesting. Let's use a real-time example. One of the new merchants that we're working with right now has, let's say, over 10 med spa locations, and they buy a lot of product, whether that is injectables, it is skincare products, and other medical equipment for their 10 plus locations, and they're expanding to more locations throughout the US. What is a way in which that med spa could engage your services to help them save money?
So when it comes to saving money, which means reducing COGS and pricing, looking at more of the income statement, it's using the intelligence to know of instances where you're paying earlier with your suppliers and using that as leverage to get better pricing, or knowing that you deal with the same supplier multiple times throughout the year and paying them at different instances, or dealing with different suppliers, which you may or may not know were related under the same ultimate parent, and using that intelligence and the organization of that to be able to negotiate not just terms, but also pricing or quantity with that vendor on that parent level, on all the transactions all at once, so that there's not just cost savings, but also harmonization and cleansing of the ERP system, so that it's not all over the place. Now, we work with a lot of companies that have sometimes dozens of ERP systems, so it's a real mess with them. With the smaller companies, it might not be as big of an issue with the organization of that, but I have seen it with some of our smaller clients where they're paying, day 34, day 36, day 38, different times throughout the year, because procurement or the purchasing officers aren't as focused on paying on the correct day. A lot of times they pay early.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So I think this kind of parallels with my next question is that you work with a lot of restaurants. You work with a lot of car dealerships that have a lot of supplies that they're constantly sourcing and high cost of goods. So talk to me about how them working with a company like yours to reduce those expenses, how you actually go in, you audit them, and you save them money.
So how the process works is once a company is engaged with us and there's a mutual interest in working together, we typically do a test and show them, after we sign a mutual NDA, show them what their working capital opportunity is, their whole supply chain. We're getting around 95% match rate on all their suppliers. And this is both direct and indirect suppliers. So everything from utilities to their direct materials, like, towels in the hotel. And from there, they can see what they can expect, the data depth that we have on their suppliers and who we are able to match. And then from there, we work with them if they choose to sign up for a subscription with our platform, showing them who the low-hanging fruits are and customizing a game plan for their category managers, their negotiators, their buyers, and also involving accounts payable or the CFO to then optimize the payment terms and make sure that we're going after what the corporate goal is. Is it cost savings? Is it working capital? And then working with them on an action plan. We provide all the scripts needed to go after the suppliers, what to say in the negotiation, and then a way to track it so that the CFO can forecast how much cash flow is expected to come in, how much has already been realized, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're doing this audit based on the information and data that you have, and you're now using AI to analyze that. So how is that AI really supporting what you're doing to add the value that you're adding to the businesses that you're working?
So to clarify, the data that we need comes from the ERP system, and that's the first ingredient in the process. These companies that we work with, a lot of times, as I mentioned, have multiple ERP systems. And this is where they're, going through all these procurement officers and category managers and managing the relationships and purchasing products. And they house all the data of who their suppliers are, their payment terms, what are they buying, what's the category, as well as how much they're spending and in what currency that spend is in. And with that data, it's then extracted and uploaded securely and anonymized to our platform. From there, we then provide 10x the amount of data out. And there's AI in this process in a few different parts. So one is on the categorization and normalization of the input data from the ERP system. Another part is on the data enrichment. So looking for firmographics as well as financials that are publicly available using AI in that case. And I should mention that we do not use AI when it comes to the payment terms. Everything is in-house there between our four walls, because it's something that we're very wary about, sharing this sensitive and confidential information that's only housed in our clients' ERP systems with an open-ended AI model. We do use LLMs, large language models, to write scripts. So the scripts I mentioned earlier about the negotiations, there's about 10 different strategies, and those scripts are determined with AI.
Gotcha. Let's take any business. So whether you're a nail salon and you've got multiple locations, you're a car dealership, you have multiple locations, restaurants, etc. Are there commonalities that all of these businesses should be looking at right out of the gate?
Payment terms, working capital. As I said in the beginning, this is something that's shared across every business, is, paying suppliers, receiving money from customers, and inventory management, making sure that your inventory is not on your shelf for 90 days, 120 days, because that's dead money sitting there. But you also want to make sure that you have enough inventory there to fulfill orders. So that's the inventory part. Payment terms is on the other two ends, which are what we focus on mainly. That's, no matter what business you're in, it should be a focus. It's just as important as pricing, because as I mentioned earlier, that's the number one reason small businesses go under, is because of cash flow issues.
And I would think that the cash flow issues would be linked directly to sometimes that inventory sitting on their shelves for too long. What are some of the creative ways you've seen companies that have had that stagnant 60, 90, 120-day inventory on their shelves start to liquidate that inventory?
It's a good question, and it's something very important. And there's solutions out there for that. We focus on the payables and receivables. It is something where we have partners that focus more on the DIO, or days inventory outstanding optimization. But there's a lot more factors that go into that. But I can introduce anybody interested in inventory to those parties that are better at speaking on that question.
Okay, gotcha. You and I will offline that. I actually have a new clothing manufacturing company that we're doing payments for that I'd love to have that discussion about for some of their inventory that's a bit stagnant. So there's probably some cool things that group could do there. So let's move into something that is kind of obscure, but really important to specific industries. But that's talking about regulations and legislation that's impacting payment terms, particularly agriculture and food. And for companies that you work with, how do you help them navigate the rules and optimize their working capital?
And it's a hot topic right now. And this is our focus. Our business is payment terms. So we have a team look at laws globally. We're a global company. We have clients in Asia, Europe, Latin America, North America. And it's a complicated topic to stay on top of because there's so many new laws, especially in the last 5 years, that are coming down the pipeline. I know Colombia just initiated a new law. There's laws in the UK around dealing with the government. And in the EU, especially France, there's strict regulations, especially when you're dealing with SMEs or small, medium enterprises, which every country has a different definition of. And that's something that our platform does, depending on where the supplier is, determining, hey, is this an SME according to the definitions of that country? And what are the legislations around if it's only tied to the SME status or in general for the country or tied to the industry within the country. And as you said, that's typically what we see here in the United States, especially around the dairy industry and construction. Now, the US really operates as 50 different countries. These are typically determined at the state level. So we have all this legislation in the platform and it's applied to those suppliers which hit that criteria. And then the platform can determine, hey, is this enforced or is this recommended? Is this a very long law? And the last sentence says, unless otherwise agreed upon by both parties, in which case, at the end of the day, it's a recommendation. So we have all these laws and we suggest to our clients, if they want to be in compliance with this enforced law, we can cap it and make sure that they're not suggesting terms that are not in compliance with their local laws.
So you had mentioned something. I want to make sure I heard this clearly. Did you say construction?
I see that in the United States, that there's more laws surrounding construction and dairy. There's really not much else in the United States that we can say is a pattern throughout the 50 states. By dealing with construction, subcontractors, government contracts, I used to work in the federal government in the United States here, and they have a strict 30-day payment for all suppliers, and that's federal law. But and then dairy, it makes sense because it's a commercial product, and that's very well regulated, not just in the United States, but you're not going to buy milk that expired 40 days ago and pay for it then. So there's a much faster payment when it comes to perishable goods in general.
So walk me through what are some of the smaller companies that you work with, like what's the general size and what are some of the larger companies that you work with? So our audience can get a sense of where they might fit in your supply chain and if it's a good fit for their company or not.
So we have no limit. We have companies as small as 10 million in revenue a year, all the way up to the biggest companies in the world in the billions of dollars. Now we're providing data and data is, as they say, the cliche is it's the new gold. What they do with the data is where the value comes. It's the actions taken with the data. And where we come in is providing that data to them, but how they utilize that, whether it's for improving the income statement or the balance sheet or just their overall supply chain intelligence, is up to the end user. And I would say each one of our clients has a different approach and value that they pull from the platform. There's a lot that we can provide there, but we have some power users that use it all. But I would say a lot of our users really have one focus, which are like, this is why we work with Calculum. And whether it's SME flagging, whether it's the legislations, whether it's improving payment terms, whether it's in overall looking at cost of debt and expanding their supply chain finance programs, seeing which suppliers offer a virtual card. There's many different value adds when it comes to the data we provide.
Would a plastic surgeon or a dermatologist, a very large operation, the type of business that you could help as well?
For them, it depends on what they're buying and what their spend is. If they're buying from larger companies and even smaller and medium-sized companies, 100%, especially if they have a lot of subscriptions, a lot of just indirect spend, they could. The one place where it's much harder is when you deal with individuals, payments to individuals. Let's call them contractors, individual painter that's not part of a company. For them, it's much more difficult to gather intelligence on those individuals. It's really a different realm. It's not really B2B there. So it's,
Gotcha.
I would say it depends on their spend.
You and I, again, will offline this because this is so fascinating. I love added value aspects of businesses like yours for the type of listener that we have, because it's completely outside the box. I was not even aware that this existed, but got some plastic surgeons and dermatologists and med spas that I definitely think you should be having conversations with, who are my payments clients, who I know you could save money from what you've described. Before we go into our rapid fire section, what I would love for you to explain is how your audit works, and then what your subscription model looks like for the...
So the audit, meaning the process of the analysis.
That is correct.
Okay, yeah. So that the analysis is very simple because there's no IT integration. It's really dealing with accounts payable and procurement, or the contracting officers, or whoever's doing the purchasing. It's really a project that they own because they have the supplier relationships. We need a few data points from their side, such as who the supplier is, where they're located, what is their payment terms that they have today. Also, what are they actually paying? Do they have 30-day payment terms and they're paying on day 25, or they're paying late on day 35? That's important. We also need how much they're spending and in what currency. And lastly is what's the commodity or category that they're purchasing. And with that data, it's then enriched and anonymized, encrypted, and then enriched. And then the platform shows every supplier that they do business with throughout the fiscal year, and they can go through it. We help them customize it. In the first few months, it's really a hand-holding, training, making sure that everything is exactly how they want for their approach. And then it's a self-service tool. As they get new suppliers that they're looking at, they can send them our way. We earmark them as potential suppliers. And then before that relationship starts, they can determine that payment term. Now, when it comes to the subscription model, with the payment model for us, it is a subscription model where it operates on an annual subscription because there's no ERP integration. It's very straightforward. It's a yearly fee and it's based on the value that the platform can provide. So we're always looking to add value and not cost more than the value we can provide to the income statement or the balance sheet.
Awesome. We love it. All right, my friend, we're going to run into the rapid fire section. So you're going to give me quick answers off the cuff, and you don't know these questions, so it'll be even more fun. So rabbit or turtle?
Rabbit.
Is there a favorite movie or streaming series that you are watching or have watched recently that you recommend?
My girlfriend just had me watch The Mandalorian, and I was surprised. It was quite good. It kept me entertained there.
Awesome. What is a book that you've read that has had the biggest influence on your life?
12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson.
12 Rules.
I was recently in France and I saw somebody else reading that book in French. So it's making its way around the globe, but he is a very famous Canadian psychologist.
Awesome. Well, you know, I'm a reader, so that is one thing that I'm going to pick up and I'm going to put on the list. So talk to me. What is something that you disagree with in your industry today?
That it's all about extending payment terms, because it's very important that there's sustainability in the supply chain. And there's a lot of suppliers, maybe some of your audience can identify with this, that can't afford to be squeezed anymore by these big companies. And we're seeing some industries approach 180. I've even seen 360 days, which is 1 year payment between receiving the product to when that supplier gets paid. And I'm actually not a fan of just pushing payment terms. It should be the correct term, not just pushing terms for the sake of pushing terms to improve the balance sheet. There's a sensitive relationship going on between suppliers and buyers, and it's a relationship that should be enhanced and not just one-sided, like we've been seeing with some of the big players in this field. So this is something I disagree with.
Gotcha. Give me 2 money-saving strategies for our audience for 2025.
Well, I'm a cash flow person, so I will flip this around a little bit. I think personally, everybody should focus on their cash flow. I'm a big fan of credit cards, so I use that all the time, even to pay my rent. I pay the fee. Sometimes I get those 0 interest credit cards, and I like to extend my payment terms personally out. But in terms of cash saving,
Awesome.
I would say, avoid Starbucks every day. It adds up if you're going there 7 days a week.
$5 a coffee.
Yes. I really like the coffee machines. They're very good. You can get a nice good coffee for $1.
And espressos are I've got one of those, my friend. I've got one of those. So 2 more questions. One, let's say you're a business doing $10 million a year in revenue, and I walk through your front door and I hand you a $300,000 check. How would you advise that business owner to invest that $300,000 into their business to help grow over the next 12 months?
It depends on what the industry is of the business. If that was given to us, Calculum, speaking from Calculum, where, as you said, you've never heard of this before. So this is something new that we've developed for the market, and I haven't seen anything exactly like it yet. Today, I'm sure we'll have some competitors in the future, but our main competitor today, I like to say, is Excel. So where I would spend that $300,000, where I would
$300,000
is on outreach and educating the market that, hey, this exists, because companies aren't necessarily going out and seeking our solution. It's more of a bystander of, we're focusing on working capital, but this solution didn't exist until a few years ago. So for us, it's going out and doing education for people, introducing us to the market, meeting people in person. I like to visit our clients, also go to conferences and meet companies that could use this, because we're doing something new.
Awesome. And your last question, who are 2 key people in your life who have helped you advance to the level of success that you're at?
Number 1 would be Oliver Bellin, my co-founder of Calculum. I met him through a mutual friend down here in Florida, and this was over COVID. Before COVID, I was working for Marriott International, and you may remember nobody was going to hotels for over a year, so all these hotels shut down. And I know a lot of my colleagues, including myself, we moved down to South Florida because the hotels were open. And I did not go back into the hospitality industry. I was thankful to be introduced through a mutual friend to Oliver, and he's been a big impact on my life. The other person I would say is my mom as well. I know that's cliche, but she's helped me grow a lot as a person and learn different facets of life, because it's important to be a well-rounded person. And this life gets very complicated. There's a lot of nuances to all of our lives. And it's important to take a wide scope with that, taking a step back from your life and analyzing it. And my mother helps me do that.
Beautiful. Eric, tell the audience where they can reach you if they have questions, comments, complaints. No complaints, just questions and comments.
Yeah, you can reach us at Calculum. So we're based in Miami. If you're ever here, please feel free to come by the office, reach out. You can also reach us online. Our email is sales@calculum.ai, and we can set up a call, give you a demo. We do a complimentary analysis before you decide if you think it's a good fit, to show you what your opportunity is, and then you can move forward from there. But our goal, especially if you're a small business owner, we want to give this to you at a very affordable price, because we want to have this grow in the market, and we know that small businesses need working capital optimization the most, and we want to be here to support that for you.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to 0 to 100 podcast. We hope you feel inspired and ready to accelerate your business. Remember, your journey to success starts with a single step. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving for greatness. For more resources and show notes, visit jaredguyrandolph.com. We'll see you next time.